So we've been talking a lot about the logistics of the various factions during the Clone Wars, and people have asked me to cover things outside of that, cover logistics outside of that. So I figured today we'll discuss logistics of some other Star Wars factions. Don't worry, we'll talk about things outside of Star Wars a bit later, but I feel like it'd be nice to round it out by today discussing the logistics of the Galactic Empire and their time in the Galactic Civil War. So let's talk about how the Empire moved troops, equipment, and supplies around the galaxy. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. Now, the way the Empire moved supplies is going to be vastly different from the Separatists and the Republic. Mind you, the Separatists and the Republic were in a state of full-scale war, fighting against one another for the fate of the galaxy. For most of the Empire's existence, it was a standing government with very little opposition, and any opposition was crushed while it was relatively small by smaller strike forces. So by the time a major war had broken out, the Galactic Civil War, a galaxy-wide network of logistics had been established by the Empire to move their troops and supplies around the galaxy, a network that the Empire could lean on in the event of a full-scale war, which they absolutely did. So today, let's talk about what that might have looked like, and we're going to do a little bit of speculation here, but let's discuss how the Empire moved things around. So for starters, let's start where we started with the Republic and talk about the troops. How does the Empire move its soldiers around the galaxy? Well, unlike factions during the Clone Wars, it's less cut and dry. While the Clone Wars factions had dedicated transports designed for moving large numbers of troops, the Empire had no such vehicle. Instead, the Imperial-class Star Destroyers seemed to just pull the heavy lifting for basically every role. It served as a carrier, a battleship, a command ship, and in many cases a heavy transport. If the Empire needed to move a large number of troops to a world that was particularly problematic, a few Star Destroyers worth of stormtroopers would usually be enough to pacify that world. So all you had to do is really move the Star Destroyers around very effectively to be able to sort of contain any potential threat. That being said, the Empire did have dedicated transports, but they seem to be a little bit more mixed in their usage, and we'll talk about them in a sec. But for the most part, moving troops around was done by heavy capital ships. Think Imperial-class Star Destroyers or the Architans-class light cruisers. Now, there were some interesting differences between the way the Empire had to move troops around and the way the Republic did, because all of the Republic's troops came from a single source, Camino, during the Clone Wars. The Empire had a variety of different training and recruitment centers around the galaxy, so their sort of recruitment and troop movement systems would be less centralized. It's likely that after stormtroopers leave basic training, or Imperial Army troopers for that matter, they're loaded onto some sort of light transport in relatively small numbers and dispatched to whatever ship they're assigned to, because it appears like most stormtrooper units, instead of being tied to any specific location or sent to to garrison somewhere, they're basically assigned a Star Destroyer or a large spacefaring vessel. In that sense, most of the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps, at least, are functionally Marines tied to a naval vessel with the objective of keeping that naval vessel safe and being a ground force that naval vessel can deploy either on board their vessel, on board another vessel, or to a planet, depending on the situation the vessel finds itself in. As such, it seems like Imperial units are generally moved around more as naval units with an attached ground detachment, as opposed to ground units being moved around as we see during the Clone Wars. And, like I mentioned, when they're shifting between Star Destroyers or postings on board Imperial vessels or in Imperial facilities, those are likely done with things like the Zeta-class transports that we see moving supplies for the construction of the Death Star. These larger transports that could carry a large number of troops or supplies if need be. But let's talk about supplies, because unlike the Separatists, but like the Republic, Imperial forces are biological and as such need supplies. They need ammunition, they need food, they need, well, the basic life comforts necessary to keep a living creature breathing. The Empire does clearly have a very large logistical network made up of cargo ships like what we see during Star Wars Rebels, and smaller warships that I think often filled a freighter or transport type role. Think the Gazanti-class freighters, for example. But I think a lot of the supplies used by Imperial troops were simply purchased locally. We see during the occupation of Lothal on several occasions, the Empire seems to be buying from local vendors, buying local food and supplies to supply their forces. Now, we don't know for sure that the supplies we see being bought here are being distributed among troops, and we do see on several occasions that the Empire serve their soldiers these basic brick-like rations, but I still think it's fairly likely that these are not manufactured very far from where they're being consumed. That they're probably buying from local sources when they can, and shipping in rations if that becomes inviolable due to, for example, local hostility. As such, the advantage of that is, and mind you that the Empire is trying to do everything as cheaply as possible, that really shrinks the necessary logistical networks. You do need to still move things around the galaxy, but you don't necessarily need to keep constant supply chains crossing the entire galaxy to supply soldiers garrisoned on backwater worlds in the Outer Rim. Instead, those soldiers can simply be patrons of the local community, and the added bonus of that is it does help endear the Empire to the local population as a valued customer for local businesses, which can do a lot in swaying public opinion in favor of the Empire. And especially as the Galactic Civil War kicked off and the Empire saw their grip starting to shake, it would have been a pretty top priority to sort of find ways to make the civilian population of the galaxy less hostile. And that could be done one of two ways, either violently suppressing them, as the Empire did in a lot of cases, or as trying to appear like a friend to the community, which this would work in that camp. So, in a lot of ways, the Empire's systems are simplified compared to that of the Republic, which likely did ship in rations from away from the battlefield as the galaxy was being ravaged by a war. One of the reasons why the Empire can rely on things like local vendors is that for most of their history, there wasn't a major war. The Imperial forces were there at a time of relative peace, so the local infrastructure was still intact and could be relied upon to supply soldiers garrisoned on that world. It's not the case for the Republic. If you'd like to learn about how the Republic handled moving troops and supplies around the galaxy during a major war that was devastating huge chunks of known space, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that, talking about Republic logistics and how they move troops and supplies to and from the battlefields of the Clone Wars. And I'd like to let me know down in the comments whether you think the Empire was buying from local suppliers, or do you think they really were shipping everything in on Star Destroyers or Gazanti-class freighters that would go to and from areas of Imperial occupation. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon to get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.